Retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman is the former commander of the Royal Canadian Navy and former Vice Chief of Defence Staff. Hi, Vice Admiral Norman. Pleasure to welcome you back to our program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thanks for having me, Vashi.
I wanted to start off before we get to Zelensky's messaging today to the UN on what came before it, which is this almost like jaw-dropping 180-degree turn from U.S. President Donald Trump from his position previously that some sort of peace settlement would likely involve concessions on both sides, particularly around territory. How much stock do you put in the change in position?
Well, I'm as surprised like you, but I think there is some substance to this. I'll be generous and perhaps suggest that there might be some strategic thinking behind this. My gut tells me that a lot of this has to do with his expressions of disappointment and frustration with his dealings with Putin, and the fact that, to be blunt, he's been played, and he's been played publicly. I think his comments with respect to the continued support of Europe and partners like Canada is really important, and that is consistent with one of his long-standing messages. It's hard to know how much license the West can take from his comments, but I think this is an important and positive development in this ongoing saga.
You and I have spoken before over often it's difficult to disaggregate or disassociate the individual in Donald Trump and the unpredictability, to put it lightly, around him and the office of the President of the United States, which had anyone held that position, whatever the words out on a big issue like this one would carry with it a lot of weight. Do you think it has the potential to impact at least the near-term trajectory of discussions, let's say, between Ukraine and Europe or between Ukraine and other allies? Like, does that potential exist?
Yeah, I think it does. I think, sadly, we're in a circumstance where we have to take everything with a much larger grain of salt than we would have in the past. But nonetheless, I think that this is, as I mentioned, this is a result of ongoing frustration and disappointment that he himself has not been able to deliver what he thought would be a relatively simple peace package. I think he is in essence putting Putin on notice, and he's putting some wind in the sails, not just of Ukraine itself and President Zelensky, but of those closest allies who may have been wondering how long they should support. I think that this is a bit of a lifeline.
His comments come, as I mentioned, just before the address to the UN from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who I thought very interestingly kind of put international institutions on notice, said, like, you're going to have to do a lot more in order to counter Russia because, and this is not an unfamiliar message, but he said it with great specificity, like Russia is going to do more than just what it is doing to Ukraine. And we do have some very distinct signals of that with what happened in Poland just a few weeks ago. What are your thoughts on his message today, and who do you think that message was really aimed at?
Well, I think there's sort of multiple targets to the messaging. The Europeans in particular, perhaps some of the currently unaffected satellites would want to be concerned. I think that general membership of the United Nations, Russia has a seat on the Security Council. They use it for their own purposes, and that may have been one of the veiled suggestions he was making. But fundamentally, I don't believe he's wrong. I don't believe he's exaggerating, and he has been saying this for a while. And many people were either ignoring him or even openly dismissing or diminishing his comments. And I think maybe in the context of President Trump's remarks yesterday, maybe those people who've been sitting on the fence might actually be paying a little more attention.
How significant in retrospect, and we're not that far in retrospect at this moment, but how significant do you think that those drones over Polish airspace, the fact that NATO and Polish aircraft were used to shoot a few of them down, like how significant do you think that will end up being?
Yeah, it's hard to say going forward. Sadly, none of this surprises me, and of course, the unbelievable rhetoric out of Moscow with respect to the intent is completely implausible. Is it a test? Yes. Is it a message? Yes. I said to somebody earlier, and I'll repeat it to you now. I genuinely believe the Russians are getting a little. I hate to use the word desperate because that brings on a perhaps frightening connotation, but I think they're running out of viable options. They're certainly running out of troops. They're running out of money, and they're leaning into the drones. And this is a not so subtle warning to Poland and other now NATO countries to just sort of watch what's going on. I think the reactions by the Europeans has been appropriate, and I think that we can probably interpret a little more license, if I can use that word, from President Trump's remarks yesterday.
If I could jump off of that point and just conclude by asking, leaning on your extensive military experience, from a military perspective, when you look at the next few months of this war, what will you be watching for to get an indication of perhaps where things are headed, or if there will be some change beyond the politics of who supports who and how much money and military, like on the ground, what will you be watching for?
Yeah, well, a couple things to see to what extent the Russians begin to culminate. Do they run out of energy to some degree? How can they sustain the atrocious level of bombing and drone attacks that we've been seeing recently? Is that sustainable? And to what degree are the Ukrainians able to muster the material support that is available to them from the West, and actually start to push back and potentially either take back Ukrainian territory or continue to seize some Russian territory in the margins. Those are two things I'll be watching.
All right, I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate your time and insights as always, Vice Admiral Norman. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Vashi. All the best to you and your viewers.